I'm Adam Schulte.
I'm Woody Fox.
I'm Andrew Zeidler, and this is our oral history interview of John Steinmiller on November 21st at 6 p.m.
Start off with obviously the beginning. So, if you could please tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you were born.
I was born in Evanston, Illinois in 1948.
Great. Okay. So, from what I understand, you had 6 brothers and sisters.
I had 7 brothers and
7
sisters.
brothers and sisters.
Right.
Okay. So, what was that like for you growing up in that larger family?
Well, it was busy. It was busy and noisy, and there was plenty of things to do. We lived in Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and at that point in time there wasn't a lot of homes built, so there was a lot of free land around there to play sports in and play on dirt hills and get into houses that are being built, things like that. So it was a lot of fun. I don't know that young people now have that much fun.
No. So, you obviously were just outside of Chicago then. So then, what was your parents' profession?
My father was a salesman in the plastics extrusion business, and worked on with natural gas companies to provide pipeline and pipeline equipment and pipeline treatment for natural gas lines.
Okay.
And my mom had her hands full with 8 of us.
Sure. So, like, what would you say your average day consisted of when you were growing up in Illinois?
What age was I?
I guess I should ask, when did you leave Illinois?
I left Illinois when I went to Marquette University in 1966.
Okay, so you were in high school in Illinois then?
Right.
So what high school did you?
I went to St. Viator High School in Arlington Heights, Illinois,
Okay, so,
which is at that point was an all-male school,
okay.
and they surrendered to including women about 15 years ago. So when I was there, it was all male.
Okay. So where did you fall in your siblings? Or
I was 3rd oldest,
Okay.
and 2 brothers ahead of me, and everybody else came after me.
Okay. So so with your high school experience, like, were you exposed to sports earlier than high school, or was that?
Yeah, I planned on playing basketball in high school, but when I went to my physical in freshman year in August, they found some surgery they had to do on me, which after working out all summer and getting ready to try out for basketball, I was kind of derailed, and that led me down a different path, which was probably helpful because I would have been unable to try out. And at that point, after I had surgery early in September, I was able to get involved with the football team as a manager, and worked with the, it was a small school there in those days, worked with the athletic director on equipment, and really learned about the culture of sports in the locker rooms and how players thought, and worked with coaches, did a little bit of training actually, taping ankles and things. So it was really an eye-opener for me. I was never going to be a good basketball player, or probably any good athlete, but I did enjoy playing. But at that point I learned just kind of the management of a sports team, the management of a athletic enterprise such as the athletics of sports in high school, and got exposed to some good people that gave me opportunities to get involved. So from that standpoint, I worked 4 years in football and 3 years in baseball as a manager, and in the final year, actually my junior year, our baseball team went to the state finals and finished 2nd place, and that was kind of the start of some great stuff not only at the school, but also for me to start thinking about what I'd be doing in any way possible later on.
Mm-hmm. Was sports a real big part of your family culture? Is that a large role in
Sports?
Yeah.
I think it was. I had a brother that played all the sports, hockey. My older brothers played baseball during the summer, and they let me play pretty often. They were only 3 or 4 years ahead of me, so that was pretty much what we did during the summers, play baseball, and we had Little League football as well in the fall. I played that. And sports, I followed the Cubs at that point, and still do. But sports was always a great outlet to play. We'd play from morning to afternoon, go home for lunch sometimes, come back, and we'd just play on the sandlots all the time for 5-6 days a week. And I was lucky in sports to be coached by some coaches that really put time in, sometimes too much time. We'd practice 3 or 4 days a week and play games 2 or 3 times a week. So some of my friends would be in the pool and we'd be at the baseball diamond looking at the pool. But it was a lot of fun because I learned a lot of strategy, learned coaching techniques, and I never intended to be a coach, but it was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. So with those different sports, like what positions were you in each of those before you kind of turned into more managing?
I played third base, I pitched, played a little outfield. I didn't like that. But that's pretty much what I did in baseball and football. I was a quarterback. I think I still suffer from concussion syndromes. I say that lightly, but I did have some concussions. Back then, though. They didn't know what it was to have that. But baseball and basketball and football in grade school was kind of the things that I did.
Okay. So straying a little bit away from sports, how do you say, or if any, was your like religious life at the center of your family life or your life in high school?
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up as a Catholic, and the church was a big part of our lives. We had to go every Sunday. I got exposed. I was an altar boy. I have a brother that went into the seminary and became a Passionist priest. He left us after 8th grade. He went right into the seminary, and 10 years later he was a priest, and he still is. I had another brother that also went into the seminary, but he played too much sports, so they threw him out. He was excited about sports. So after about 2 years, they kind of said, maybe you'd be a better athlete than a priest. But so that kind of tells you it was a family that of the Catholic faith, and we were brought to be Catholic and to be active Catholics, and I went through 16 years of Catholic education and don't regret it in any way.
Were there any other activities besides sports, like jobs or hobbies?
Yeah, once I could, at the age of 16, I could get a job. I worked in the summers, starting in high school. I worked in a convenience store at night. Sometimes most of the summers I had 2 jobs, so I'd work during the day and then 6:30 show up to work in the convenience store and close it up. Mm-hmm. Back in those days, there weren't as many guns or characters out on the street. Yeah. And these days it's different. As I think back, I didn't know I had that much guts. I never thought about it, but it was a different time. So worked in a convenience store. Grade school, I had a paper route. In the summer, I worked in a factory for a couple years, and then after that, into college, I worked 2 years as an intern with an advertising agency in Chicago, and that gave me another insight into business and into marketing and into creativity. So that was very helpful too.
So obviously, with your current career in the NBA, like, was the NBA at all kind of on your mind? Were you watching the NBA when you were little? Was that part of it?
Yeah, there wasn't much on TV in those days. I remember seeing a couple games in person at the amphitheater before the Bulls. There was a team called the Packers, I think, Chicago Packers. Chicago Zephyrs were another team. And there wasn't a lot on television really, but during my college years, I watched a lot of college basketball, went to all the Marquette games for 4 years. But the way I got exposed to it was an opportunity to have a part-time job when I was in my senior year.
Okay. I guess expanding to a little more global events, like this was obviously the latter half of Vietnam War and kind of in the midst of the Cold War. Like, was that kind of acknowledged to you? Did you see that in kind of the environment around you?
Oh yeah, it was like any campus. It was in the Kent State era, and naturally every campus had a lot to say about it. Students, faculty. There were a lot of splits between students, taking different sides. I was in student government. I was the president of the student body my senior year, and it was not fun, and it wasn't always reasonable dissonance. It was very often a lot of hollering and a lot of arguing and a lot of face-to-face. Actually, some final exams were stopped. You know, everybody just got to go home. And the Marquette campus was unlike any other. It wasn't violent. There were a lot of marches. There were a lot of good discussions, but there were also a lot of meaningless and kind of discussions and situations that didn't settle anything and didn't always lead to good discussion, as opposed to just who can talk the loudest.
Mm-hmm. So obviously with you going to Marquette, how was your college discernment process? Was that kind of expected for you to go somewhere else, or were you also looking at local colleges?
No, I probably would have, I looked at the University of Missouri, because I went in as a journalism student. And I looked at Northwestern. I don't think I had enough money or enough the highest grade point. I had good grades, but Northwestern was a tough school to get into, and if you had grades, you'd have to have money too, in most cases. University of Missouri, I looked at very close because they had a very good college of journalism. And then there came Marquette, and I'd heard good things about it. I had some relatives that had gone there. And I was at the campus once before I went there, and it kind of seemed to be where I wanted to go. So I was accepted there, and again, I was really helped by not only the classroom, but the location, the size of the school, the size of the city. They had all the things I wanted and all the opportunities I wanted. So. And I think it's still that way at Marquette.
Okay. So did you go to Marquette for journalism?
Yes, I went to Marquette in the College of Journalism. It was then the College of Journalism. Now it's merged with speech and journalism together, communications, I believe. And I also took marketing classes that were helpful to me. And my internships during the 2 summer years were very helpful too.
Okay. Did you come to Milwaukee much at all before you came to Marquette?
I came to a Milwaukee Braves game one year when they were playing the Cubs. I think I had one visit on campus. It wasn't very official, but so there were things I didn't know. There were things I didn't know till I got there, but there was no turning back, and there was no reason to.
Do you remember that Braves game, like how that went?
Sure, I do. Yeah. It was exciting. I think it was Eddie Matthews and Warren Spahn in that era, and it was a great. County Stadium was a great stadium. It was well filled. It was a rivalry then, Cubs and Braves, just like Cubs and Brewers are now. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. So, could you think back about what your kind of first impressions were of Milwaukee when you first got here?
Well, it was, when I first got there, I knew a few people from my high school, not many. I wasn't always a highly high-level extrovert, so it took me a while to get a pace and get to know people, and lived in a dorm, and gradually it became a very friendly situation. Got into playing intramural football, and that's where I met older students that were very helpful to me. And by the end of the first semester, I felt pretty good that this was a great place, and the place to be, and the place I wanted to be.
Yeah. Can you think back to any kind of experiences outside of the college that you had when you were doing it?
Well, I had a job my first 2 years. Freshman, sophomore year, I worked at a weekly newspaper on the northwest side of Milwaukee called the Northwest News. And that was a good experience for me because I was able to do writing, and I did things I didn't know anything about. Like I'd cover weddings and cover recipes, I'd pick the recipe of the week. I didn't know anything about recipes. But the people in Milwaukee know how to cook, that's for sure. And nobody ever complained that this recipe was bad. So, but it was a newspaper that was filled with some of the sports in the area, and a lot of people read it. Back in those days, there were little papers for the neighborhoods and the communities, and it was interesting. It wasn't around the corner. Some days I had to walk to the newspaper office, which was at 34th and Lisbon, and other days I took a bus, depending on how much money I had in my pocket. But it was just very interesting because I had the ability to write and to proofread and do things that newspapers do, and it got me started in learning how to write in due time, how to meet deadlines, and I made a little money too.
Okay. So, like, with the, were you aware of any of the open housing marches going on with this?
Yeah. Father Grappi was very active and had a strong following on campus as well as in the city. Always, as far as I can tell, always nonviolent. There were some arrests. In my mind, it was a constructive effort to awaken the city and people who lived in the city but who weren't exposed to the inequalities of the inner city. But I also had a theology teacher that was very helpful in explaining what was going on and who the leaders were. I actually marched with Father Grappi one night at the Eagles Club, it was the Eagles Club then, now it's the Rave. It used to be kind of a Eagles Club. It had a great gym, along with the gym, it was also a great theater in some ways. Marquette would have some of the homecoming activities there. And I did want to see and experience. I certainly believed in most of Father Grappi's beliefs of equality and why and how to arrange it and get it. And it did expose me to the people with very clear thoughts and people that I could believe in. Some were very extreme and went to extremes, which I wasn't interested in being. But the sad thing is, it was a lot of effort and a lot of people put time into it, and there were some changes, but there were not enough changes.
Could you talk a little bit more about, you said you marched with Father Grappi that one time?
I was one of probably 1,000 people.
Yeah.
But it started, I think, that day on 16th Street, and Marquette actually had an event that night in the Eagles Club, and the Eagles Club happened to be a location where it was felt that all people were not welcome at the Eagles Club or within the Eagles structure. And that was a strong statement and a beginning of my getting to understand that it was still a very split country, not just Milwaukee or anywhere else. It was across the country. There was inequality. And in this case, Father Grappi was really a leader of trying to gain equality to all for jobs and education and housing and all those things. And there were a lot of good things done in terms of housing, a lot of efforts in education, and a lot of people that really worked hard to make, in some cases, small changes, but they were helpful.
And I guess going back to more your Marquette sports, so this was during the Al McGuire years.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think about how that was with Marquette?
Well, he was a Pied Piper of basketball, no doubt about it. I think every coach in the league wished that they had the same following of their students, that they could get away with what Al got away with. He was very bright. He was very funny. He told great stories long before storytelling became a talent of coaches. And everybody loved him. He had a great temper, and he had a great sense of humor. And he could be yelling at the ref one minute and throw out a great sentence to the ref that would even make the ref laugh. But he took it seriously. I mean, he made some good stands. He felt he got sent to the wrong place by the NCAA in the tournament one year and said, I'm going to the NIT. And didn't bother the students. A lot of us went there, drove out to New York in the car, and had a great time. And it was great to be in New York, and it was just great watching.
So did Marquette University win any national championships while you were there?
Well, when I attended, they did win the NIT championship in 1970, and it was a unique, very unique, because I believe it was Coach McGuire felt that he was good enough to be in the NIT and the NCAA, but he chose to go with the NIT because he hadn't been seated properly, or in his mind, they weren't being fair in where they were sending him. So that, and you know what? We should check that too. I don't know if you can check that, because he might have done that with Southern Illinois. I didn't think he did, but because in '67 was when they played Southern. If you Googled McGuire, would you find out?
Yes.
'67 NCAA, because I should have remembered that.
He was stirring things up while he was there. He wasn't just year in, year out doing the same thing. He was kind of...
No, he was always, he always had something going. You know, he liked rivalries. He had a good rivalry with DePaul, Notre Dame, you know, that was really a good rivalry. There were a lot of, something was always happening, which just was great. It juiced up the kids, went to the games, the players were always with him, they backed him. It was just, there was always something happening.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any personal interactions with him?
I did later in my career. I got to know him really well, and spent some time with him different times. When he retired from coaching, he started doing some basketball TV work, a lot of it, and would come in my office after he'd come into our video room and watch tapes sometimes of college games, just so he could get a feel for how the teams are before he saw them in person. And he would sometimes come into my office and take a nap, poke around, take something. You know, we didn't have bobbleheads back then, but he saw something he liked, he'd take it. But he'd also leave something too. Sometimes he came in and he left some like 10-year-old National Geographic magazines that I don't know I don't know what they were, but he gave me, he collected soldiers, and he collected sometimes miniature cars and die-cast trucks and cars and things. I don't know why, but I think he might have had them and traded them for soldiers or stuff. But he gave me an Oscar Mayer truck, and he gave me a pickup truck that was pretty nice. So, but he had a big heart, and he had a lot of quirks that were exciting and sometimes interesting, sometimes crazy, sometimes, and you know, he left us too early because even after he coached, he was a great television analyst and enjoyed it, had a lot of fun. And people nowadays that are younger don't have the full understanding of how much fun it was to be around him and to watch him coach, and the success he had, and how he really backed his players, how he made sure that they graduated. Almost all of his players have graduated. And there was a great play recently this summer. Actually, it had been done 3 or 4 years ago, and then it came back this summer, but it was about Al McGuire. It was a one-man show, and there were actors in both cases where there was an actor who played Al McGuire, and it's fantastic. If you ever get the opportunity, it may come back next summer, but it was just amazing because it really gave a pretty good representation of who Al was and how he got where he was. And he had struggled to get a good job. Started out in a small school and ended up in a little bit larger one, and then came to Marquette and just told great stories for a long time about his philosophy of life, his philosophy of basketball, how things had gone wrong sometimes and how he corrected them, and he explained some of his behavior. And it was written by Dick Engberg, who was probably one of the best sports broadcasters, certainly in the top 5. And Engberg actually wrote the play and knew Al very well, so it was really accurate.
So you obviously know him pretty well. What do you say is like one of your best memories of?
I have a lot of memories just watching him coach. Rides a motorcycle. The funniest time was when he was in that era where he'd come in and watch Marquette practice in the Bartley Center sometimes. And sometimes he'd watch video in our room, and there was one day where he just drove his car right up to the front door of the building. I don't know, the building is kind of set back. Well, nobody could figure out whose car this was. It was right at the front door. So he just drove on the plaza and came in, and then, they were running, whose car is this? They couldn't figure out. Of course, nobody was worried about terrorism then because, but some ways he was a terrorist, in his own way, not in the serious way that we all worry about, but he would take chances and take risks, and so what? Nobody ever got hurt, and he generally got his point across. But all he knew was, he wanted to get in the building, so he'd drive. Back then, I think it was like a 10-year-old Ford or something. I don't know what he was driving, but he was just a quirky guy and fun to be around.
So you were down there for the championship, right?
Yep.
So how did that happen? Where you were at the final game, I would assume. So what was that like?
Well, we were up in the third balcony, so nobody really stormed the crowd like they can do at the Bartley Center, and there were a lot of police there anyway. But it was, it wasn't the NCAA, but it was fun.
Okay. So now it kind of comes to how did you first get acquainted with your first job at the class?
Well, it was in September of 1970, and I was completing my, when I was student body president, I kind of cut my classes down a little, so I had to go an extra semester, just so I could do both well. Mm-hmm. And it was a good idea for me. So it was the first semester of 1970, early, I think it was mid-September, in the student union, and one of my fraternity brothers, we were just talking about looking for jobs, part-time jobs, and he'd found one on the, there was a lady over in Tower that had the job board. I don't know if they have that anymore, but she had all the jobs that people were offering to students, and he had gone over there. He had particularly gone over there and said, well, she told me about this job that, I wish I could remember her name because the lady was really helpful. Kind of funny, but she was always helpful. And he came back to the union and said, she had this job, and it was working at the Milwaukee Bucks office, the new basketball team, and but it's only 1 day a week, and you know, not many hours. And I just listened, and I thought, hey, why not? So I gave it. The next day I was down there, and the lady who ran the business office, I could tell she was desperate. She wanted to hire somebody. And the job started out being just to change the outdoor marquee. It was the old-fashioned marquee, similar to what they have on the Varsity Theater now. Mm-hmm. And the building was at 7th and Wisconsin Avenue, and it was had a marquee on both sides of the corner. It was right on the corner of 7th and Wisconsin. And she said, you know, you just come in once a week, or maybe twice, and put these letters up, and you know, next game and all that. I have a picture of that too here too, so I can show you that if you want. But I jumped at the job, and the first week I was there like 4 hours or something. I think I was there twice for an hour and a half. Just had to get used to. There was this long pole, you know. You put the pickup, had little hands on it, little fingers on it. And then hook it on the edges of the sign. And you know, once you got the hang of it, it was good. But on windy days, you'd be, you know, that wind goes down Wisconsin Avenue, and sometimes the letters would fall off and go into the street. You know, people would laugh, or you know, it was pretty quick and easy to do, really. But I made it perfect so I could get a little more hours, you know. So that was the start of my job. And then the second week, you know, I think the lady's name was Kathy Bartley. She had been the ticket manager at Marquette University, and then she had gone in the first year of the team, 68-69. She had left Marquette and gone to the Bucks office to run their ticket office. And so she'd been there 2 years, and obviously they didn't have anybody to change the sign, so that's how I got the job. But she really took an interest in me, and I learned a lot about tickets, which gave me a great head start, and ended up doing a lot of ticket work, and just learning about being in an office. And at that point, there were about 6 or 8 people in the front office, so I got to do a lot of different things, you know. I'd go get their coffee, but I'd also pull tickets and get tickets out in the mail, and just do whatever needed to happen. And at the end of the first semester, my senior year, when I did graduate, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I liked the job a lot, but I just, you know, it was kind of, you really don't, you kind of like graduating, and you kind of wish you could go on again, you know. So I remember I went home for break over the Christmas holidays, and on the 2nd of January I got the phone call, and Mrs. Bartley called me up and said, well, when are you coming in? And I said, well, I'll be there tomorrow. So I kind of just made a decision, you know, I was going to go back, and she said, you know, we'll hire you. And so it became a full-time job, and it was a salary, and I got insurance, you know, which was good, and never used it, the insurance, but it was just the start of being a adult in a lot of ways. And overall, during that year, it was a totally exciting year, because it ended up being the championship year, and with Kareem and Oscar and all the championship team, and it was just totally exciting. And I had thought about, wanted to go into advertising, and because I'd worked in the marketing side and did writing and things like that. And back then things were starting to get very tight in the advertising business, cutting jobs and not hiring people, and internships really didn't exist much. So that first year was good. I worked in the ticket area. I still did the sign. I did things like worked in the basketball camps. We had summer camps back then that were run by Ron Blomberg, who coached at Brookfield Central. Very good basketball coach. Had very good teams, and he took over the camps program, which during the summer he came in, I think we had about 18 or 20 camps all over the state in the summer, and within a couple of years we had 35 different camps all over the place, and from South Dakota, North Dakota, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio. We just had camps all over, and there was a lot to do, so I worked on that also. And that was 70, 71, 71, 72. And then at the end of 72, the general manager, president of the team was a guy named Ray Patterson, who had started the team in '68 as general manager, not general manager, as president, and was previously a UW basketball player for 4 years, an MVP player, and then became the headmaster of a school called Wayland Academy in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And we had camps out there. But he was a very bright guy, and the Houston Rockets at that time were kind of struggling. They couldn't get their act together down in Houston, and they had jobs open. They wanted to get a go-getter to help build a new stadium eventually and get their team in shape. And Ray Patterson went to Houston then, which opened up a leadership position, and a couple of the people in the Bucks office also went. One of them was Kathy Bartley, the ticket manager who hired me. And the other was a guy named Jim Foley, who I had met in the office and never really worked for, but he was the PR director. And he had gone to Marquette, and he had been Al McGuire's PR director for several years, and then went with the Bucks, I think in 1969. So he had been there 3 years, and he knew I went to Marquette. I got to know him very well. And basically I interviewed for the job. He was doing the interviewing, which was nice. It wasn't like he was just leaving it up to somebody else, because there's no way I probably would have got that job. And eventually, I think, because of my 2 years of being there, people knew I was pretty responsible, that I was helpful, and I had a tremendous opportunity at the age of 21, then turned 22, of being the PR director of the team 2 years after they won a championship. So that was very very exciting, and Jim Foley actually gave me 4 or 5 weeks of like a super class of just doing the things of how he did them, and he was very well organized and very well liked as a PR guy. And I did it for from 72, 73 till about it would have been 76, 77, and then I became on the business side a business director, and then eventually became a director of business, and did that for a very long time. And as things changed, ownership changed, I became vice president of business operations, and now I'm an executive vice president of operations, doing a lot of other different things, not just the PR side. I'm really not doing PR anymore. So as I approach the sun over the horizon, I've really had a great career and rounded out, got a lot of experience not only in public relations and advertising and communications, but also on the business side, and was able to work alongside great people like Wayne Embry, who became the general manager when I was brought in for PR, and also I know pretty well that he endorsed me and helped me get that job, and just great people that really not only taught me how to do things in business, but also how to be a good person.
So you got that progression, but kind of going more back to the beginning. So obviously the Milwaukee Bucks was a new team for the Milwaukee, it was a new franchise. Do you remember what the environment like that was with the new team coming in? Was there a lot of excitement?
Well, I remember as a student, the first 2 years, I didn't work there, but as a student, the students were excited. A lot of the students came out of the East Coast and knew the Knicks and knew the East Coast, the Boston. A lot of guys from Boston were big fans, so it was exciting for them. It was exciting for the city because they'd lost the Braves. They didn't have the Brewers yet until 1970, I believe. And that was another reason that they got excited, because for those first 2 years they had lost the Brewers. They had no pro sports team really. The Packers were still playing a couple games at County Stadium, but it wasn't like having your own team. So for a couple of years the Bucks had the platform. And it's funny because in 1970, the spring of 70, when I finished my senior year, and then in the fall I had to get that extra semester in, but I was on the grounds crew of the Brewers when they came to town in 1970. And it was amazing because it went right down to the last wire. They didn't know whether the league was going to allow them to move. They didn't know anything other than we got to get the field ready because we're planning on getting the team. And I think it was no more than 3 or 4 days before opening day that they had to get everything put together, and the grounds crew needed people. So I worked on the grounds crew for maybe 2 weeks before the stadium opened, and then for another month and a half I worked on the grounds crew, and that was fun. I was on the grounds crew on opening day, and it was an exciting day. Packed, the stadium was packed, and a lot of the students were there. They were having a great time. It was like a big party, you know. Marquette kids know how to party. Whether it's sports or whatever it is, they make a party out of it. And the whole city was excited, and in the same way, when we won the championship, it excited people. But it was different because it came so easy. You know, to win a championship your third season is as an expansion team, and there's been no team that's done that in any sport, any of the major sports, of actually winning a championship when you're in your third season and of expansion team. So it was exciting, and the team was, players were very excited. All the fans were excited, but it wasn't like we knew how to celebrate it. We didn't have a parade. We had a little party down in the hotel that was across the street from our office over at 6th in Wisconsin. It was the Downtowner Hotel. It didn't have a ballroom. It had like a multi-purpose room, and the players and their spouses and the ownership. We had a good time, but it's going to be different next time.
Yeah. Sure. So you were working there when Ross Sender was drafted, is that
Yeah.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what that kind of experience was like with Milwaukee getting the lottery pick and how that environment was like?
It was amazing when we won the coin flip. I wasn't working there then. It was 1969 in the spring, early spring, when we won the coin flip. Actually, it was February, but we won the coin flip. People went crazy. I mean, they knew we were going to have a great team at that point. Mm-hmm. It's not like now when a year and done kids will go into the pros. Let me clear my throat a little bit. Talking too much. I'm supposed to, I guess, though.
That's great.
You getting what you need?
Yeah, no, this is fantastic.
Hope your teacher thinks so.
He's gonna love the photography stuff.
When the Bucks won the coin flip, it's not like these days where they make the drafting and the coin flip and the lottery and everything, where it's like a 2-hour event. It was just on the phone. It was a conference call. Our ownership, Wes Pavilon at that time was our owner, and he was there on the phone, and John Erickson, who had coached UW basketball, became our GM those first 2 years, and then he ran for a governmental position in Madison. So he left right after, a little bit after that season. But it was exciting. I mean, everybody went crazy. Kareem at that time was Lou Alcindor by name, and everybody knew he was the guy. He's who everybody wanted. He played 4 years of basketball, which made him very, very mature and very ready to play. He was coached by John Wooden, who was, one of the top basketball coaches ever, that there will ever be, who had coached him and many other great athletes for a long time. So it was perfect. And putting around him guys like Bob Dandridge was a second-round pick, but was a great player. Nobody realized he was a great player because he went to Norfolk State, which was a small school in Virginia. But our scouts even then had scouted him and thought he was good, and he was. He became a NBA All-Star. He had 2 rings. He won a ring with the Bucks. He won a ring with the Washington team as well. So it was an exciting time when he signed his contract in April. Very educated. He was very mature. He didn't know much about Milwaukee. We were very lucky that he gave us 6 years of great play. He had lived in New York his whole life and then spent 4 years at UCLA and Los Angeles, so 2 large cities is where he grew up. So it was really a big adjustment. People in Milwaukee are friendly, and everybody, they love their athletes. And it was just a hard adjustment. And one of the things that didn't happen for him at UCLA was that he wasn't always allowed to speak to the media. And that made him a little reclusive when it came to pro, because the pro sports writers, New York had, because he had lived in New York, he was well followed by New York media. The local media at that point, we had 2 newspapers in town. They, of course, wanted to speak with him often, not just when he signed or when he had his first game. I mean, they covered him very well. And he was often a little bit not always easy to talk to. And he would answer, but and over time, it took a long time for Kareem to really understand that the media had a job to do, and part of his job as a player was to give answers to media. But some of the writers had no strategies. They went at him hard, and some of them were not always very polite. Some of them would get upset if he didn't give them 10 minutes or 15 minutes, or if he was answering in short words or whatever. And it was part of his maturity process. He got better and better over time, but it took a long time. And yet, during the interim, he was a top-rate performer as a player for the Bucks and for the Lakers, certainly. But he gave what he could for us, and then really wanted to get to a city that was a little bit larger. And he did it in a way that, rather than rant and rave and make a big story out of it, he did it very carefully and very discreetly, and not giving us the chance to do something without putting it in the papers. And I felt that was good. Once he made a decision, the ownership had done everything they could to find a way to keep him satisfied and adjusted to the city. And it wasn't that he didn't like the city or the people, which was always portrayed by a lot of the writers. It was just that he had felt that, it was time. And he had won a championship for us. Came very close in 1974 of winning a championship in the 7th game. We just ran out of a point guard in that year. In the 7th game, we were playing in the Milwaukee arena. And we had played Friday night in Boston, won an overtime game to get a 7th game at home. And it was, early on it was a good game, but Boston just kind of pulled away because we didn't have a point guard that could effectively break the presses, which were used then, and it was just unique. But it was a great series, Boston and Milwaukee. It was a 7-game series with Kareem and Cowens and Havlicek and it was just great. So it became as probably the second best series. It was the second time we'd gone to the finals, but Kareem did come back in another year or two, but didn't, at that point went on after that to Los Angeles. But he was coming in as a 22-year-old PR guy, it was intimidating. Not that he was intimidating, it was just a big job. He probably looked at me and thought, what's this kid doing? Although we were pretty close to the same age. But he became cooperative, and I knew the lines of cooperation, and I kind of got to know how I could approach him and when, and had great cooperation from most of the writers who knew I was trying, and so it was a good experience for me, and I understood where he was coming from, and I think gradually he knew where I was coming from. And we've become pretty close friends since then. During the Los Angeles period, I really didn't have much opportunity to speak with him or talk with him, but lately we've really brought him back into our Bucks family, and he'll be around this year. He's been around off and on the last 2 or 3 years. He's writing some great books, writing some great essays that were in Time magazine. He has a new book out. He's written some children's books. He's very, very, very intelligent and very articulate in speaking about what his concerns are and what he thinks. And he's not I don't consider him to be a radical or an extremist. He makes sense in what he speaks about, whether it's inequality or whether it's racial situations. Whether it's the basketball game, the current state of NBA and college basketball. He's just very, very interesting to listen to and speak with. And he still has a love of basketball, and he still understands it. But he's found other outlets to also become very well liked in some ways, and also very well followed. You may not agree with Kareem in all situations, but you sure can listen and read what he's saying and see where, he makes some great points. And at his age, it's just great to see him flourishing on a different career, not just being a basketball guy. He's had, I think, a strong influence on a lot of parts of our society, and I think will continue to do so.
So with him coming in, and then obviously, I don't know how big of a deal it was Oscar Robertson coming in compared to him. Like, how would you describe that?
Well, we knew with having Kareem that our basketball people were, at that time, the first 2 years, they knew the first year that they had an okay team, and then when they got Kareem, they knew that they had to upgrade. If they wanted a championship, they'd have to do something quickly about it. And during the second year, Dandridge came in and played well. And then the third year, between the second and third year, Oscar was getting a little bit older and knew that he wanted to win a championship, and it wasn't going to happen in Cincinnati for him. He just, they didn't have a team that had the right pieces in place. I think his coach was not always easy to be around, or didn't understand what else they had to have around Oscar to help get a championship. So Oscar did want to come to the Bucks once he was spoken with, and came in, and it was an amazing transition. Just, of course, knew how to play the game, how to help the younger players, how he could sync with Kareem, and it really came very quickly. Obviously, in that third year, it was a unique year. Winning 66 games and winning 20 games in a row back then, which at that point I think was the highest streak at the time. It was just a perfect year in every way, and Oscar also helped us get to the '74 finals as well. So it was a pairing that was the best team in the league for several years. And Kareem won MVP several times. One time we didn't even make the playoffs, but he was still MVP of the league. And Oscar, again, was a pro. Very, very particular about his habits as a player, in terms of being in shape, being prepared. His warm-ups were so unique. Everybody goes gaga about the Golden State kid. Yeah. And Oscar had his routine, but it was very basic. Start shooting close to the hoop and move out gradually. Anytime you ever see him on the bench, whether it's on television, past old television things or whatever, he'd usually have a ball in his hands. Always had a ball. He'd sit in the locker room before the game, always had a ball in his hands. He had his routines and his habits that allowed him to focus on the game, allowed him to be comfortable with the basketball, and stayed in shape, and was very intelligent, and a good example for younger players, and was candid. Wasn't afraid to let a player know, hey, in the proper way, how something could be done better, or if someone wanted to have a long career, how to maintain that career and how to get to the point where you are a professional, not just a player.
So, with you being in PR and those kind of jobs, what would you say your relationship with the players were with that role?
Well, all different stages. When I first became the PR person, there were players that were a lot older than me, and then there were one or two that were kind of in the same zone. You have to draw a line. You can't, show favoritism, but it was easier to talk at the beginning with younger players, but ultimately, being part of a team in that standpoint, you got to know everybody. You got to know what they liked and how they liked to be treated, and who they wanted to talk to and what they wanted to talk about. And there wasn't near as much demand for media. Even, Kareem and Oscar drew a lot, but most of the writers would always want to go to the stars. And nowadays, with all the channels of social media, players can put out their own stories and their own interests and their own profiles and build their own character and their own personalities pretty easily. Back in those days, it was pretty much newspapers, radio, and TV, and the players who got interviewed would get most of the attention, and that's the way it was. But to have a team, everybody traveled in the same way as they do now, but now they're charter planes, so there's no waiting time in airports where guys would sit around and talk with each other and learn about each other, and you had a a quicker, tighter bonding of teams. Now it's a little bit easier because of airlines are one of the things, and different interests, where it takes a while to get teams bonding, to know each other, to like each other, to play well together, but also off the court, to be sure that when you're showing up for practice or a game, everybody is really on the same page. And in the early years of the 70s, it was a little bit easier for coaches and the management to keep people together. And now it's an art. You got to have good chemistry. You've got to have players that will fit in different ways and be part of a team. And it will always be team building that's important, and selection of players, not only their talent but also their character is important.
With this whole timeline of your career with the Bucks, where did your own family kind of fit into this?
Well, they'd come to games a lot. I'd have to get tickets for them a lot. They watched games whenever they could. So it was, they were happy I was in sports. It's still, it was in my family, as we said earlier. My one brother worked for the Chicago Sting soccer team for a number of years and was part of their championship team. I think it was in '79 or '80 with Karl-Heinz Granitza and some really good players and coaches. So he had that experience. He had worked in equipment management for the Bulls for several years in the '70s, and played some semi-pro baseball, and so he had his run at sports too.
So where in this timeline did you end up meeting your wife?
Pardon me?
Where in this timeline did you end up meeting your wife then?
I ended up meeting my wife officially on the corner of 7th and Wisconsin Street. And there I was putting up my sign. And I didn't put up like, will you meet me or anything like that. I didn't even think of that. So, but she was riding a bicycle up Wisconsin Avenue from a job that she had at a store. And a good friend of mine, Charlie Besser, who became a roommate of mine and is very involved in sports now with a sports marketing dynasty of sorts. He had walked up the street, talked to me, and he knew my wife, Corinne, and he introduced me to her, and it eventually, it wasn't easy, but eventually I convinced her that she should marry me.
So then you ended up having, was it 3 kids?
I have 2 kids. They're not kids anymore, fortunately. They still, once in a while they might act like kids, but I have a son, John, who works with the Chicago Blackhawks. He's in media relations, and he put in 8 years with the Brewers in public relations, and he put in 2 years with the WNBA Phoenix Mercury. He too got a ring in his first year there. But he enjoys the hockey kind of the culture very well. He loved the baseball culture too. 161 games, 162 games compared to 80, 82 is a little bit different. So he has a little more free time, but he has done very well in wherever he's been, and really enjoys the hockey players are a different culture too. I mean, they sometimes go to the minor leagues when they're 15 or 16 to work their way up. But he finds them to be very interesting, a lot of fun, very dedicated to their sport, and he's enjoyed it. My daughter is in fashion industry in New York. She's been there for probably now about 12 years. She went to the Parsons School of Design and is now working with a fashion designer who has her own line and also has a chain of stores. So she's very close to the fashion world after spending 8 years with Teen Vogue magazine, working as an editor, and then moving over as a freelancer and now working for a fashion designer.
So you gave us, when in the pre-interview, you gave us a couple of your kind of more like milestones, you would say. So if you could just touch on those. Or you said you met, if you could tell us about when you met the Apollo 2 astronauts.
Yes, when I was the student body president in, that would have been 69, 70, I met the Apollo 7, was it? Is that what it was? What did I say?
2.
Apollo 2? You better double Google that. I don't remember how many Apollos there were. But we'll recheck that. But it was, I think it was Armstrong, the year of Armstrong and a couple other guys.
When did you meet Armstrong?
I met them all, because, oh wait,
The whole-
I think they were all there. Grissom?
So would that be, was that like Buzz Aldrin and?
Well, I don't, there were, I think 2 or 3 of them there, I guess. Armstrong was one of them. And there was 1 or 2 other guys from, it was Apollo 2, did I say? Apollo 7?
It probably was Apollo 7. I don't think there was an Apollo 2 mission.
He created one. All I remember is they gave him a jersey, one of the Marquette jerseys. They all got one. I don't remember. It's not in there?
Yeah, he says
It's
it's
probably 7 then.
Apollo 7.
Why don't you just Google Armstrong? Because I think Armstrong was one of them.
Armstrong Apollo mission. So it's just kind of like a big school event, and you were obviously.
Yeah, they visited. When they visited, they had a big dinner for the
And then it's being the student body.
big shots, the donors and the whatever, and then they plugged in the students to it. So it was good. It was being able to meet them was good. But I don't want to be wrong on those guys.
Yeah.
Why don't you just do Marquette, Apollo, Armstrong?
Apollo 7. Armstrong was not on Apollo 7.
He wasn't?
No.
What was he?
He was on,
Apollo 11?
yeah, 11.
That's what it was. It was the.
I think he might have been Apollo 11.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that was the only one he was on. 11.
It was Apollo 11?
Yes.
And I don't remember who else was there, but Armstrong was. It's in the Marquette archives somewhere, I'm sure.
Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin.
Buzz Aldrin, okay. So those 3 were on Marquette's campus for a day or a day and a half, and they were given jerseys, and it was fun. Meeting those guys was something.
And then one of your other milestones was when you said you managed All-Star Weekend.
Yeah, getting the All-Star game in Milwaukee was a real coup in a lot of ways. Nowadays, it's really hard to get the All-Star game. I think with our new building coming next year, that within 3 to 5 years, I think they've already named the next 3 years, but by year 4, year 5, we should have an All-Star game because we have a new arena. We're getting more hotel rooms because in 1977, when we had the All-Star game, we had enough hotels between the Pfister and the what is now the Hilton, used to be the Schrader Hotel. There's a lot more hotel rooms, and there's going to be, I think there'll be additional convention space, and there'll be additional convention hotels as well. So we should be in the running very soon. And when I say soon, I said, as soon as possible, which would be in the 3 to 5 zone. But in those days, in '77, the All-Star game was okay. It was a weekend of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And in our case, we were responsible to have set up the arrangements. Nowadays, the league owns it. It's a league property, and then they bring it to the city, and you've got to do all what the league tells you to do. 100 pages of rules and stuff, and we just had to clear things with them. Hey, we're on Friday night. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a dinner, and the All-Stars will be at the dinner, and then the game itself is pretty easy to manage. But it was a lot of work, a lot of details. It went off very well. We had we instituted kind of an open practice on the Friday. Kids could come down, businessmen could come down and watch the workouts of the two teams, which is kind of new. Leroy Neiman, the great artist who did a lot of sports art, also was there sketching and right at the table of. So it was a very good event. It was great for the city. They'd never had an all-star game in basketball there, and it just went very well. We had a lot of support from the Association of Commerce, Milwaukee Association of Commerce, hotels. It was just a great event, and it made our fans very proud. It's kind of ironic. We didn't have a player in the game, which was different, but we got by it. Yeah. It was just at a time when we were in transition. Actually, Don Nelson had just taken over the team in, I think it was October, early November, and the next February it was the All-Star year. So he was in transition. The team was in transition, but it really carried us through a year in a lot of ways because it was a big event.
And then kind of the last big one, you brought that poster, obviously. Could you talk about the McDonald's opening?
Yeah, the McDonald's Open in '87, I believe, was a fantastic event. It was the first time a NBA team had ever played a professional team from another country. And it was a new event. It was something the league had lined up. And they were really looking for a place which team wanted to have it. I think some teams didn't want to fool with it. It was new. People didn't know how good it was going to be. But I think we jumped at it, to be honest with you, and said, hey, we can pull this off. And we did. It was a kind of a round robin with Tracer Milan and the Russian Soviet team and the Bucks. And we had 2 games, Friday and Saturday. Actually, it was Saturday and Sunday. We had 2 games and we beat the Russians. And it was very exciting. And the foreign players enjoyed the city. I think a couple of the Soviets actually wanted to kind of just disappear and stay in the United States. And there were a lot of assistant coaches around there that really weren't assistant coaches. They were keeping an eye on the players, so they didn't disappear. And the coach was a guy named Gromelsky that did a very good job, and ended up he didn't do very well against the pro team, and within a year or so, a little bit of time, they just moved him on. He actually lived in Illinois for a long time, was very good at basketball, very good coach. He didn't have players at that time.
Okay. What was your kind of role in that whole?
Well, we had to arrange, work with the hotels. We had to arrange the arena situation where we had practice on one day, and then we had a dinner, convention center dinner, and had to make sure we sold all the tickets. That's the one thing, you got to move those tickets. And then made sure that all the governors of the teams, the ownership, who would come to the game, all had their proper accommodations. Made sure that they were welcomed at the airport, and made sure that they were welcomed at the hotels. Made sure they get to the events that we had. We had a international Friday night dinner, and it was just a really good international platform for Milwaukee to have this event. The games were sold out, and we had a large screen on Kilbourne Avenue, like huge screen that showed the game. The games were both on national TV as well as going to other countries. So we had about 4,000 or 5,000 people outside watching the games on Saturday and Sunday, and it was a great event from that standpoint. And it helped build the city's profile in the whole country and in the world. And it was a big deal to beat the Soviets. It was a big deal.
Was that a big deal coming in, like the fact that there was a Soviet team coming into the city?
Oh yeah, I think people were interested and excited about it. It was still, close. The Cold War had kind of thawed out, but it was something different, because the Soviets didn't travel a lot, and like I said, there was no international play like there is now. Now we have some teams play during the preseason; they'll play international teams, and the Olympics have loosened up too, where the Olympics are having a lot of travel to all different countries for qualifying meets and things like that. But back then it was very, the NBA I think wanted to broaden their reach, which they've done very well. Probably in terms of United States sports, we have the best international relationships and the best international competitions that go on with basketball. And baseball has a little bit of it, and football doesn't. They play games there, but football is rugby in the major markets, and or soccer. So basketball has really, I think, gained the most attention of international fans in sports.
Okay. And then you said the other kind of international event you're involved in was the Beijing Guangzhou.
Yeah, we were invited by the league to go to Guangzhou and Beijing and play games against Golden State at that time. And it was a great experience going over there. And it was just a unique experience. I'd never been to China. Most of our players had not. We had one player at that time who had gone to school in China. He was a U.S. citizen, but his father was engaged and worked in China, in Beijing, and the school that he went to, he was able to visit and do a clinic with the kids, and we saw a lot of parts of Beijing and Guangzhou. Saw the Olympic building that was being used, and it was hundreds of cranes in the city with all the building they're doing. We also had Kareem was part of being there, and actually was very interested in seeing a lot of the historical sites, and it was just a very unique experience during the preseason in 2008.
So you brought that picture of the team meeting President Barack Obama. What year was that?
With Obama, that was, I think it was either 2012 or 2013.
How did that come to?
Senator Cole actually arranged that for us.
Okay.
We didn't win a championship, but Senator Cole and Obama were close friends, and it was not a major national event. It was a tour and a visit, and which the president was very comfortable doing, and it was very kind of him to arrange that. And our players, of course, enjoyed it, and we had a great tour of the White House and met the president, which is always good. So that was a very good event.
Great. So I guess moving more to kind of the present time and the future. So the biggest headline, obviously, is Giannis.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think back of how that process was to kind of? We just got this player out of Greece, like how that process was of finding and drafting him. Well,
we had scouts watching him, I think, for maybe 2 years. John Hammond scouted, Billy McKinney was one of our player personnel people. Dave Babcock was another one of our personnel scouts. So between those three, John Hammond and Billy and Dave, I think they were kind of the point people that had identified him, and Maybe others had looked at him but weren't as certain as we were. And nowadays the draft it's pretty much a stretch anyway. You never know what you're going to get as players leave in their first year or second year. You can only project. You can watch them play 1 or 2 years, and then you can only project what they're going to do when they go into the pros. And it's unfortunate if you look at the drafts 1 year or 2 years later, guys that were picked in the first round aren't even on a G League team.
Yeah.
You know, they go to Europe maybe, or they're looking around to go to Europe. So there's been somewhat of a dilution of talent because players go very quickly into the NBA and haven't really polished their skills. They may be great players and they may be quick, or they may have 1 or 2 talents, but overall their talents haven't been coached enough. They've been on AAU teams where they fly to Orlando and Las Vegas and play in teams during the summer, and the 1 or 2 players who are the best on the teams end up handling the ball all the time and scoring the points and helping win the games, and it's just not a good way to learn basketball, I don't think. And those extra 2 to 3 years of being coached well take a lot of pressure off the player and a lot of pressure off the coach, and allow real coaching to happen, as opposed to, well, he's going to be with us for a year and we're going to make sure that he plays well and helps us win games, and then he goes on. Well, there's a lot of players would benefit by staying in school if they could. How that's going to turn out, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's really up in the air, but it's a situation that everybody looks at in the game and says what's the right way to do it, and maybe a few players are ready and aren't really interested in college or interested in playing even 2 years, much less 3 or 4. And in other sports, golf and hockey, players come out of high school or college and very quickly go into the pros. But I think in basketball, because of the difference between college basketball and pro basketball, those extra years in college can really help a player build a longer career and a more successful career in a lot of cases.
So obviously we have, besides Giannis, you kind of have, the other big new thing is the stadium. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and I don't want to short Giannis either. He came to he came to Milwaukee, I think, having been to the United States maybe just once, but never in Milwaukee. He acclimated very well. There wasn't a lot of challenge through his visas and his permits and immigration and everything. There were things that had to be done, and there were some delays and things, but it was handled very well over time. And then getting his family here was a little more difficult, but again, that was done, and his family is living here now, and they have been since he came over. They came over a little bit later than Giannis in his first year, but they did come, and he is a young man who is very mature, even though he didn't do a college 4 years or even 1 year. Had worked within the Greek basketball program and done very well. And ends up being a very mature, good character, and certainly a great player. An exciting player, as well as a strong player, and someone who never stops practicing. Practices year-round, works extra time even during the season. We'll be back in the gym late at night, early in the day. Just a true commitment to basketball in a very good way.
So, sorry, now to move on to the stadium. What was your kind of involvement in it? I know that was a long process over the course.
Yeah, it came very quickly, really. And when the team was sold, the new ownership of Mr. Edens and Mr. Lazary and Mike Fascitelli and Jamie Dinan were I think the point people, very much so. The fact that Senator Cole had agreed to contribute to the ownership side of the arena, and the new ownership and Senator Cole had matched their contributions. That made it a little bit easier to pitch the arena. On the government side, I think there was an understanding that Milwaukee deserved to have a pro team and also deserved to have a facility that was not only for basketball but also for entertainment, sports, music, any special event entertainment, children's shows, things like that. It could really make a big difference in the city, not just in the arena area, but also in the downtown area. And the result is that everybody worked hard. I really didn't have much to do with it. I was able to watch it happen. I was able to, while Senator Cole was preparing to sell the team, I was more involved in that and more involved just in talking about the options and the possibilities for a new arena, and how we did some polling and things before the ownership even changed. But it was very certain that if we were going to stay in the NBA, we had to work very quickly to get a new arena in any situation. And I think the momentum and the impetus that Senator Cole saw a way that he could sell the team and keep it in Milwaukee, and he also had made a commitment to contribute, that was helpful. And then the desire of the ownership to put in their funding, and also their desire to say, hey, this team's going to be here and we're going to have a great building and a great team, and we're also going to help downtown Milwaukee and the Milwaukee region and the state of Wisconsin become better known and become a real asset to the state. So it worked very quickly. It's one of the quickest arenas probably in these days that has come to reality. And by next September in 2018, it will be a fantastic building with great comfort and great convenience, and a real magnet for entertainment, not just Bucks basketball, but also the entertainment tours of music and other special events that will be looking at that building and the surrounding area around it.
So what's your, I guess, I don't know how much your day-to-day operations are, but like what would you say your main role or job is currently?
Well, my main goal at my stage in life is really contributing anything I can to the success of the team and helping out in different areas. I really enjoy the sport of basketball. I enjoy the ownership and management that are in place now, and I'm not ready, nor do I want to retire. Whatever retire it means, it means different things to different people. I want to be a participant and an active member of the franchise and accordingly of the city too. And that's what my hopes are, knowing that down the road I'm not a 10 or a 15-year person, but I am a person that would like to help to continue to push forward the good things that can happen by the Bucks, by the new arena, and around the downtown Milwaukee area and the region. We've got to grow. We've got to spread our arms a little bit. The Foxconn development down around Racine is going to be a big opportunity for more people to work here, live here. More jobs are going to show up because of our new arena. There's tremendous activity downtown and building all kinds of different, not only housing, but also office building and things. And if we're going to retain young men and women and retain them with good jobs and a good place to live and work, we just need to be very focused on it. And I think that everyone in business is aware of that. And the hope is to keep UW and Marquette and UWM and Concordia and all of our colleges keep the good talent here. And the arena is just a little part of it, but it's an important part because work is involved, but also the entertainment, the play side of life. It's a good place to raise children. It's a good place to go to advanced education, whether it's college, trade school, junior college, whatever. It's just a good place to be, and there's going to be a lot of opportunities going forward. So that I think is a point that basketball can bring a lot to, and the arena will help. But it's got to be a full speed ahead process on every level, including education for grammar school students and high school students, to make sure we can raise the levels that those students, they can have hope of getting jobs, they can have the talents to get jobs. And it's up to everybody to help push that education button a little bit harder and really get focused on making sure we're not losing generations of kids who aren't reading or writing and enjoying the fun of math as they move along.